Hey folks, Hal Shurtleff here with Camp Constitution, and we are visiting the USS Albacore Museum. The Albacore was a submarine used from the early 50s to the early 70s. It's in permanent dry dock here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, right very close to the Maine border, and it's off of exit 7, and we're going to go inside and take a look around.
Top of the sail. Notice the flat windshield and clamshell-like doors. There was a small platform up there where an officer and a lookout stood their watch. Lieutenant Hunter.
Unlike the movies where a submarine would submerge in 30 to 45 seconds, diving Albacore was a slow, deliberate process conducted with safety the main criteria. From the time I was told to prepare the bridge for diving until I finally reached the control room could take up to half an hour.
And we just walked on to the USS Albacore, a Cold War submarine, and you could see the very close quarters of the crew members here. Here is a place that sleeps 10, and that's the if you have claustrophobia, you will not be a submariner. And they were known, those who served here were known, it was known as the silent service.
Escape trunk was the main entry for anyone coming on board. At sea, it would be used if the boat was disabled and unable to surface. If no rescue vessel or chamber was available, 3 crew members at a time could escape into the water and, using inflatable life vests, rise to the surface. The bow compartment was basically enlisted crew's quarters. There were 26 bunks in this space. If you were assigned one of the upper bunks, you had to be somewhat of a gymnast to get in and out. You can see that some bunks shared space with large valves and other pieces of equipment. The electronics technician, Jim Tyrell.
We sometimes thought up funny things to break the monotony when underway. One thing we did was to form human trim parties. We had a new officer learning how to trim the boat, and 6 of us would walk from the bow compartment aft to the machinery space, throwing his trim off. The 6 of us were making one end about 1,000 pounds light, and the other end 1,000 pounds heavy. We would wait a while until we got the trim perfect, then we would walk back forward again to the bow compartment. Pretty soon the trim pump would start up, and we would go back aft again. Finally, the chief of the watch told on us, and we were ordered to stay still.
2 small closet-like spaces. The first is the officer's shower, about the size of a phone booth. Because fresh water was a scarce commodity at sea, a once-a-week shower was the norm, whether you needed it or not. The second small space is the officer's head or toilet. A tank, known as a sanitary tank, located below the deck, holds shower water and refuse material from the toilet until the tank is emptied by pressurizing it with air and blowing the contents into the sea.
Lieutenant Hunter. Blowing the contents of sanitary tank to sea left some residual air pressure in the tank. Unless that pressure was vented off, the next user of the commode was in for a real surprise when it came time to flush the toilet. Most of the time we were on the surface when the tank was emptied and the residual pressure was released overboard. If we were submerged and the pressure had to be vented into the boat, the resulting aroma was a real attention getter.
Across from the bridge access door is the ship's navigation center, where the quartermaster of the watch was stationed. The quartermasters were responsible for maintaining and projecting the ship's path of travel, or the ship's track. Note the 3 different colored buttons on the instrument panel to the right of the seats. These are the switches for sounding the ship's alarms. Green for diving, red for collision, and yellow for general. Above the raised platform is the ship's periscope, and it is here that the conning officer, usually the captain or the executive officer, stood his watch. Unlike today's sophisticated periscopes with radar, radio, TV, and infrared capabilities, our periscope only had a basic set of optics. The 2 seats to the left were occupied by the diving officer, the inboard seat, and the helmsman, the outboard seat. The diving officer's set of controls could be electrically connected to control both the diving planes and rudder, and also could control the dorsal rudder located on the aft end of the sail. Standing directly behind these seats was the chief of the watch. At his station was the Christmas tree, a panel of red and green lights that indicated the condition of all the openings in the ship's hull that could cause flooding of the boat. A red circle indicated that a valve or hatch was open, and a straight green light meant that it was closed. Before the boat was submerged, the chief of the watch would call out, "Straight board," so that the conning officer would know that all hull openings were shut and it was safe to dive. The chief of the watch also was the ballast control panel operator, the trim manifold operator, and air manifold operator. Aft facing consoles. We relied upon sonar to be our eyes and ears when submerged. We had two types of sonar: passive or listen only, where the operator listened for sounds created by other ships, sea creatures, or the weather. The other, active sonar, required that we project a sound wave into the water and listen for a returning echo. Sonarman Ashley Fletcher.
I remember the time we were coming out of the yard, and on our first dive, the bow dropped like a rock. I was in sonar watching the screen in front of me while sitting in my chair. Next thing I knew, the screen was up on the ceiling and we were headed straight down and bounced off the bottom several times. Fortunately, we were only in a couple of 100 feet of water. Everything was dark and quiet until the captain gave the order to switch to emergency lighting and blow all forward tanks, all back full. We surfaced backwards.
And here where the enlisted men hang out. Chess and checkers and other games, and this is a really tight quarters here. Look at, you do have to be a gymnast to sleep in some of these places. Incredible.
Under the berthing and mess deck area is a second battery compartment identical to that up forward. You can see a submarine battery cell in the visitor center. At the end of this compartment is the crew's washroom and toilet facilities to serve the 50-man crew. The toilets were flushed using seawater and drained into a second sanitary tank located under the deck. Because fresh water was costly in electricity to make at sea, freshwater usage was pretty much limited to about a gallon per man per day. A partial sink full of water was used to take a bird bath. This consisted of brushing teeth, shaving, washing hands, face, and whatever parts of the body needed washing. Due to sanitation requirements, only the cooks, baker, and mess cooks were allowed to exceed the stringent water limitation.
And here we are in the engine room. And this had a 50-man crew.
In the area in front of you are some of the propellers used by Albacore and other submarines. Albacore was the first modern submarine to have only one propeller. Originally built to use the single large propeller you see, Albacore was later outfitted with two propellers as part of an experiment to provide greater propulsion efficiency. One of the three smaller propellers was a spare for Albacore, while the other two are from the USS Jack, SSN 605. The only other U.S. submarine to have a counter-rotating propeller propulsion system. Under the leadership of Admiral Charles Mommsen, Albacore was conceived to inaugurate a radical change in submarine design. Experience in World War II had shown that speed, endurance, and maneuverability were key requirements for submarines. As a result of this experience, Albacore's hull was designed with underwater speed as the prime requirement. Scale models of the hull were tested in tow tanks and wind tunnels to determine the optimum hull design. Albacore was built with a newly developed high-strength steel hull. Along with these two innovations, Albacore was to serve as a test vessel for the newest designs in submarine technology. Throughout her career, she tested many innovative concepts. As a result, the U.S. Navy was able to refine these designs before incorporating them into the fleet. Albacore truly lived up to her motto, Prenuntius Futuri, or forerunner of the future. Chief Quartermaster Norm Bauer.
There was a time when we were returning to Portsmouth when we picked up a sonar contact which turned out to be a Russian submarine. With our superior speed and maneuverability, we shadowed it for a long time, finally forcing it to the surface inside the 12-mile limit. Since we couldn't stop him, he just steamed away. Please proceed to the...
And here we are at the Indoor Museum, where you have a lot of great information about submarines, and this particular submarine, built at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, authorized November 24th, 1950, First commissioned December 5, 1953. A nice picture, overhead picture of the Albacore, where it is now. And the winter hours are in January and February. I would recommend calling first, but for the most part open on a regular basis. Then they have certain rates, group rates, veterans rates, etc. Definitely worth a visit. And folks, here we are at the Memorial Garden, which is right behind the Visitor Center. And here you see the USS Albacore SS-218. Now this wasn't the same vessel that we were just on. This memorial is dedicated to the 86 men who lost their lives serving their country on the submarine USS Albacore, 7 November 1944. And over here, this is really sort of a moving memorial here, still on patrol. U.S. Navy submarines paid heavily for their success in World War II. A total of 374 officers and 3,131 men are on board these 52 U.S. submarines still on patrol. We shall never forget that it was our submarines that held the lines against the enemy while our fleets replaced losses and repaired wounds. And that was Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz. I can assure you that they went down fighting and that their brothers who survived them took a grim toll of our savage enemy to avenge their deaths. Vice Admiral C.A. Lockwood, Commander Submarine Force from 43 to 45. New Hampshire's lost boat. This memorial is dedicated to the 78 men who lost their lives serving their country on the submarine USS Capelin, December 1943. And this one here, dedicated to the men of the USS Thresher. 129 gallant men, military and civilian, who went down with their ship off New England's continental shelf, 10th of April, 1963. USS, dedicated to the shipmates who lost their lives on the USS Lot 9 off the coast of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, 1941. In recognition of the dedicated craftsmen of the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard who built and maintained the finest submarines in the world, the crews who sailed them, and the selfless volunteers whose untiring efforts contribute to the success of Albacore Park. So this concludes our little visit to Albacore, the Albacore Museum, and definitely worth a visit. And it's right off of Route 95, Interstate 95, exit 7, just a short distance. And it's open year-round. You just have to check in January and February because the hours fluctuate. And they have special rates, family rates, military on duty, free of charge.